Eagles Entertainment.
With the 12th pick in the NFL Draft, the Philadelphia Eagles select.
You're listening to the Journey to the Draft podcast.
Welcome to the Journey to the Draft podcast. I'm your host, Fran Duffy. We've got a little bit of an ESPN feel to the show today, and it starts at the very top of the show as Pick 6 gets going with, once again, our friend Greg Cosell from the NFL Matchup Show, which airs on ESPN, and we're going to be talking about some skill position players, running backs, wide receivers, maybe from that second and third tier of those positions that, maybe middle of day 2, early day 3. Those mid-round picks, they can certainly make an impact on the NFL draft and certainly when they get established in the league. So we'll talk about some of those really intriguing names that you need to know with Greg Cosell at the very top of the show in Pick 6. After that, we're going to transition to Mr. Relevant, where this week I catch up with Greg's host on the NFL Matchup Show, and that's Sal Paolantonio from ESPN, and we're going to discuss the pivot points of this draft in the top 10. We'll get Sal's thoughts on how he sees some of those really important selections panning out here as we get to the NFL draft, which, again, we're just over a week away from. So excited to dig into that with Sal. Afterwards, we've got Draft Buzz, where Ben and I are going to keep the ESPN theme going. We're going to break down Todd McShay and Mel Kiper's most recent 3-round mock draft that dropped over on ESPN earlier this week. We're going to get into some of the picks that stood out to us all the way through the draft. And obviously, we'll talk about the players that they have the Eagles selecting in that mock draft as well. Let's get into a little bit of what we're going to see next week here on the show before we get things started, because we've got, number one, our mock draft extravaganza. Talking about mock drafts, we're going to catch up with 32 writers from all 32 teams, and we're going to have them make a pick based off their intel, their knowledge of the team that they cover. How is this draft going to play out? We're going to talk about it on our mock draft extravaganza episode. That should drop Monday of next week. Myself, Ben Fennell, we're going to go pick by pick. I'm going to know all the picks beforehand. Ben will not. So we'll get Ben's live reactions to these selections and get a lot of intel, because we've seen a lot of fortune telling from this mock draft, from that episode, every single year. It's one of my favorite episodes to do throughout the calendar year. After that, a little bit later next week, we've also got our Q&A, our draft mailbag episode, where basically we are going to empty the mailbag. And if you've got questions now's the time. Jump on Apple Podcasts or Stitcher, wherever you listen. Go and leave a question, because myself, Dane Brugler, Greg Cosell, we are going to be answering all of your questions next week on the show. So whether you leave it on our Apple Podcast page or hit us up on Twitter, we will answer your questions. We'll go through mock drafts. We'll go through player rankings. Whatever you've got, now's the time. We're over or under a week away now from the draft. So whatever you're looking for, Greg, Dane, myself, we will look to answer it next week here on the show, and then we will have analysis every single night of the NFL draft as well. So I appreciate everybody that has gone on and throw some questions over on our Apple Podcast page, but now's the time. If you want one answered in that Q&A episode, that draft mailbag episode, middle of next week, now's the time. Jump on and leave your questions for Greg and for Dane. Also, look, if you are listening to this show and you're trying to cram, you're trying to get ready for next week's NFL draft, maybe you're just trying to listen to it for the first time, and you think, I'll unsubscribe after the draft. I'm telling you, do not, because we are going to keep this podcast rolling all year long, just like we did a year ago. And I promise, for all the reasons that you like listening to this show now, even if you've just been listening over the last few weeks getting ready for the draft, we provide all of that same intel, all of that same information all year round. No matter what time of year it is, this podcast transforms its shape, it transforms its structure, and the whole time, our whole goal is to make you a smarter fan about this entire process. So if you want to know about the guys that are going to be picked next week and how they're going to impact their NFL teams, we're going to do that immediately after the draft. We're going to have division-by-division recaps, picks that stood out to us, what it tells us about the way that those teams and those schemes are trying to develop. We're going to do all that after the draft. If you want to hear from longtime talent evaluators, whether they're GMs or area scouts or lifelong media members, you're going to hear me pick their brains about how they scout players. I do all of that starting in the month of June. We start previewing this season of college football and the top prospects you need to watch in July. And then obviously we've got our weekly previews and recaps on who's falling and who's rising and all the players you need to know all through the calendar year. So if you are looking for year-round NFL draft analysis, you got to make sure you stay subscribed right here on the Journey to the Draft podcast. That being said, let's get this episode rolling. I'm excited to start things off with Greg Cosell in Pick 6.
Now it's time for Pick 6.
Well, excited to kick things off here with Pick 6 as my friend Greg Cosell joins us once again here on the Journey to the Draft podcast. And Greg, today we're going to talk about some backs. We're going to talk about some wide receivers. We're just about a week away from the NFL draft. You're going to join us next week to talk through some fan questions at home. But before we get to that point, we're going to talk through some 6 more players. Excited to dig into some more skill guys with them.
Yeah, no, I mean, skill guys are obviously fun. And the fantasy crowd loves that more than anything, of course.
Sure. No question. So let's start at running back. And one of my personal favorites in this class, a guy that's I think is a really fun study, is Memphis running back Kenny Gainwell. This guy I saw in person a couple of years ago. Last year, his only year as a starter, as a redshirt freshman for the Memphis Tigers. He opted out this past year after some deaths in the family due to COVID-19. Was not going to put anyone else at risk, so decided to sit out the season. But what did you see from Gainwell when you studied him on film?
I love Gainwell. Look, let me put it to you this way. I mean, here's what I said in my transition with Gainwell, because I did him last summer. Obviously, didn't play this year. I'm looking. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. I did. Wow, I went through 8 games.
That's a lot of games.
That's a lot of games. I thought that he's your classic guy in today's NFL that transitions really well, because I think he's a good runner and a high level receiver. I mean, I think if you're just looking at receiving traits, and I've probably done 20 backs, give or take, I think he's as good a receiving back as there is in the 2021 draft class. And, he's not quite at the same level athletically and explosively as Alvin Kamara, but I think he presents similar value to an offense. Because what really stood out with Gainwell to me, Fran, was how, where he lined up. Yep. We're not talking about a guy who was catching checkdowns and a wheel route every once in a while. This guy lined up, detached from the formation, split as a wide receiver, and he ran wide receiver routes.
Yep.
He lined up at times as the boundary X. So, this guy can really impact your passing game, and he is a good runner. I don't think he's a quote unquote foundation back in the sense that he's going to get 280 carries in a season. But, I could almost see him. Think of the way the Packers used Aaron Jones this year. Jones was not a volume runner this year, as a lot of fantasy people thought he would be, but they chose not to do that. Then I guess you knew that would be the case when they drafted A.J. Dillon in the second round a year ago. But, I could see Gainwell in an offense where he gets 170 carries, but is a important weapon as a receiver.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, the guy caught 51 passes in 14 games last year. And as you mentioned, it wasn't just like screen passes. I mean, he'd line up in the slot. He'd line up out wide. He'd run slants. He'd run option routes. He'd run slot fades. You'd see him do all different kinds of things. Then from the backfield, running sail routes, and just a wide variety of usage in the passing game. And then as a runner, you got to keep in mind is that, he was a high school quarterback. So he's going in his first real year playing the position, comes in and ends up being the lead starter because they had some injuries there in the backfield. And he was extremely, extremely productive. He is a really fun player. I really think that when you talked about Aaron Jones, I feel like you look at a Kareem Hunt, that kind of a player. I really liked him. I thought he was a patient runner. He had a good feel for following pullers out in the perimeter. Consistently ran behind his pads. He had good contact balance to him. Just a really interesting player. I agree, though. He's not going to be that downhill between the tackles grinder where you give him to him 20 times. That's not going to necessarily be his bag. But this is a guy who can impact the game in a lot of ways.
I couldn't agree more. I really like the player. And again, now it comes down to when you draft him, you have to know what he is.
Yep.
And I think he can really be an important piece to an offense. It's funny what you said, because I said he showed contact balance in space, willing to lower his pads and initiate contact. You wouldn't call him a physical power runner, but he certainly was a guy that ran well. I liked the way he ran. He's just not going to be a true volume runner in the NFL.
Exactly right. All right, let's get to a guy that I think has some similarities in terms of the overall skill set, and that's North Carolina running back Michael Carter. He was kind of the lead back for North Carolina. We've talked about his teammate Javonte Williams, who only 2 career starts for Williams, but he's seen as maybe the higher upside play moving forward into this draft. You talked about Javonte Williams in the past, but have not talked about Carter in this show. So let's get your thoughts on Michael Carter and how you feel he transitions to the NFL.
I kind of like this kid, which I know you did too. Obviously people are going to look at the size. He's short, but he's not small. I kind of felt like when I finished watching him, he kind of reminded me in some ways, and I don't know if you saw this, of Clyde Edwards-Helaire coming out of LSU.
Sure.
I think that Carter has a strong multidimensional skill set. I think he's a good runner. I think he's a good receiver. He'll be a productive back. The question becomes, within the context of your offense, what is he? What kind of volume does he get? Is he a complement? Can he carry 14 or 15 times and be a factor? Because he doesn't run like a scat back. He's got a strong, powerful lower half, and he absorbs contact. He ran through contact. He's kind of a slasher, a darter. He's very compact. I thought he had really good balance. I like the way he ran. I think he's a really intriguing prospect.
To me, if you envision almost like kind of even like a Duke Johnson, do you think he could be that kind of a player, that kind of a presence for an offense when you factor in the pass game, just the kind of the way that he's built as well? He's a tough kid who plays bigger than his size. I just feel like he's definitely going to be able to carve out a role in the NFL, even if he's not a starter, quote unquote. I do think that he's going to find a role in the league for sure.
I couldn't agree more. Duke Johnson's a good comparison.
Yeah.
Obviously Duke Johnson's not a foundation back. You can run him at times. But yeah, I think that Carter could be that guy. He is a good runner, but again, being 5'8", 201, I'm not sure what that means as far as how teams see him, but he's a very good receiver. And I wouldn't call him truly explosive, but he's got some lower level explosiveness to him.
Yep. No, he's got some short area bursts.
Without question. Yeah.
Let's get to another back here, the third one that we're going to cover that's built a little bit differently than the other two. I think when you look at Kenny Gainwell, at Michael Carter, they're both on the smaller side. You go to Trey Sermon, he's 6 foot. He's 215 pounds. He's got arms like vines. He's got 33.5-inch arms. Only a 1-year starter at Oklahoma. Transfers to Ohio State this past year, starts a bunch of games on the back end of the season, was outstanding down the stretch for the Buckeyes. They do not get to the playoff without Trey Sermon because they don't beat Northwestern without him in tow. What did you see from Trey Sermon on film?
Well, I went back and watched him, believe it or not, last summer and watched him in 2018 and 2019 in Oklahoma. And then, of course, this year I watched him at Ohio State. I really like Trey Sermon. I think Trey Sermon could get lost in the conversation that backs are not important. They don't have the value that they once had because there's nothing flashy about Trey Sermon. But I think he is a professional runner right now. I think he fits the profile of the sustaining competitive back. I think he had the look and feel of a mature runner. He had patience, he had vision, he had a feel for working in confined space, he had balance, he finished. He was workmanlike. To me, he was the kind of back that 20 years ago, everybody would have said, boy, that guy is a great, great back. That's the way I felt about Trey Sermon. I really liked the way he ran.
Greg, would you, the one guy that stood out to me in terms of how he's run in the NFL so far, Alexander Mattison. Do you feel like he's a guy that kind of presents a similar skill set to what Madison has brought as a former 3rd-round pick coming from Boise State to the Minnesota Vikings?
I think Sermon's better.
Yeah.
I did Madison coming out of Boise, and I liked him, but didn't love him.
That's how I felt too, and that's how I thought I was a little bit surprised he went as early as he did, and he's turned it. Honestly, he's looked better in the NFL than I thought he would. But that's kind of I look at Sermon, and I'm like, I like him more than Madison coming out, but I wonder if he can be that similar kind of player.
Well, Sermon's going to be one of those guys that's in the eye of the beholder because, again, you're dealing with a guy that you probably look at him and say, gee, he's not special, but was Cam Akers special? I mean, Cam Akers came out of Florida State. I like Cam Akers a lot. I kind of see Sermon in a similar way. I think Akers will end up being the featured, the number 1 back for the Rams this year, whatever that means in terms of carries. I don't know what that means, but I think Sermon is just a professional runner. In other words, if you're a team that feels that the running game is truly important to how you play your offense, and you want to have a guy that you feel comfortable giving the ball to 16 to 20 times a game, I think Trey Sermon can be that guy. He's just not explosive. He's not going to give you big plays in the run game. He's not going to run for 40 yards, 50-yard touchdowns. But and he's not necessarily shifty and explosive, or elusive, but he grinds out yards.
And at the end of the day, too, like James Robinson was an undrafted free agent last year,
Right.
and became the foundation back, a huge part of the Jaguars' offense as a rookie. Like, it becomes an aspect of the situation that the player falls into as well.
Right. But people might say, "Oh, he's a free agent. He gained 1,000 yards, so Trey Sermon, we'll draft him in the 6th round." Again,
right.
Then it comes down to team, and and how people feel about backs. Which is always. That's always team and scheme specific.
Tough.
We know that the James Robinsons of the world make people believe that you could go down to the Target and get a back. You know how that goes. Yeah,
that's exactly right. All right, let's get to receivers, because while we have covered a lot of receivers already on this podcast in this segment, we still have a few more, and more than that we could do. Let's start off with a guy that I find to be so intriguing, and that's Amon-Ra St. Brown from USC, true junior, 5'11", 197 pounds, started on the outside this past season, taking over for that Michael Pittman role on the left side of the formation for the Trojans. Previously was a slot receiver, but he started each of the past 3 years for USC. His older brother, Equanimous, has been in the league now for a couple of years with the Green Bay Packers. Interested to get your thoughts on what you've seen from Amon-Ra St. Brown with USC.
I like this kid. I watched him last summer and I watched him this year. To me, he's more of a slot. I don't know what your feeling is. I know he can line up outside. It depends on the team, because he kind of reminded me of. He kind of reminded me of Robert Woods.
Sure.
And I think that you're dealing with a kid that is smooth. He's fluid. He's a comfortable route runner. I think he's not fast in terms of a 40 time, but I thought he ate up cushions. I thought he showed an understanding of how to run routes, how coverage dictated and impacted different routes. He was very good against zone, understanding voids. I thought he knew how to run routes with pace and tempo. This guy just struck me as a professional receiver.
He's a pro receiver. You said one thing there in terms of like changing his pacing. One of the things I wrote down is that he maximizes his speed. I know he tested in like the mid to high 4.5s, but when you watch him, number one, he gets to top speed quickly. And I think that's so important for him because he's able to threaten vertically on every single snap. And he knows how to weaponize that. He knows, like, hey, if I sell really hard vertically and then I get into the break point of the route and I drop my pads, the DB doesn't know if I'm going vertical, if I'm breaking back to the sideline, if I'm breaking inside, outside, and he sells that really well. And then you see that ability to create his own separation. And he's really, really good at the catch point as well.
Couldn't agree more. You nailed it. 100% nailed it. And as I kept watching him, Fran, and I know it's easy to go, oh no, because this guy's become a great pro in terms of a volume receiver. But am I crazy to think that he's a little bit like Keenan Allen when he came out of California?
I would say no. I would not say that's crazy at all.
I mean, I thought of that as well. Woods was probably the guy that immediately jumped into my head. But the more I watched Amon-Ra St. Brown, I kind of thought, God, that's kind of the way I felt about Keenan Allen coming out of California.
Yeah, and the thing with Allen, and I think you would say that about Amon-Ra St. Brown, is like, all right, well, does he have an elite trait? Does he have one physical aspect of his game, outside of the technical stuff that you would say that is an elite trait? You would not have that same question with Tutu Atwell from Louisville, who is a blazer. And that shows up in the 40. He goes 4.35 at his pro day and all that. But when you watch him on film, you absolutely see that explosiveness. There are other questions with Tutu Atwell. The fact that he came in at 155 at his pro day. Albert Breer on Wednesday morning put out a tweet saying at the medical check, he checked in 149 pounds, which at 155, he would be the smallest receiver drafted in the last decade. At 149, you're going to have to go way back to find a receiver that was that small that got selected in the draft. But Atwell certainly will hear his name called. The size will worry some, but he's got that electric speed as well.
So what happens with a guy like Atwell to me is, how is he deployed in the NFL? I mean, he's got electrifying speed. They used him a ton at Louisville on jet sweeps, a ton.
Yep.
They used him in the screen game, which are two major parts now of NFL offenses. He's not going to be a volume target. We know that. Is he going to be in the slot? Conventionally, traditionally, is he a slot receiver? You probably want him in motion. You want to move him around. You want free access off the line. You want to get him the ball on the move to take advantage of his explosive burst and speed. he's a coaching staff guy.
Yeah.
It's going to be incumbent on the coaching staff to find a way to integrate him into the game plan with his speed, his explosiveness, and his home run hitting ability, which theoretically can impact the game at any time.
Yep. I mean, he is a stretch player, whether it's vertical stretch, horizontal stretch. I mean, he can do all those different things. At his best, you look at him and think he could be like a T.Y. Hilton, ironically, coached by the same staff in Louisville that had T.Y. Hilton down at FIU. And I think when you look at Atwell, he has shown the ability to track the ball over the shoulder. He's used downfield at times, and he is absolutely electric with the ball in his hands. Just needs to clean some things up from a route running standpoint, and the size is going to be a question. And like you said, beauty will be in the eye of the beholder with him. But he's another player. We talked about this with Gainwell. He was a high school quarterback, so still a guy that very, very new to the position. Yes. He was a quarterback at Northwestern High School, which is a powerhouse down there in Miami.
That's correct. And it's funny, when I watched him last summer and didn't have the correct weights and the heights and the whole deal, he was
listed 190.
No. He was listed at 5'9", 165.
Oh, there you go. Okay.
And it made me think, okay, well, that's exactly what Marquise Brown was coming out of Oklahoma, and he was a first round pick. But obviously he's 5'9", 149. So that's a meaningful difference in weight, But again, if we get into that conversation, I know you've had this conversation with Ben a lot, about explosive plays. Yeah. Offenses in the NFL are looking to create explosive plays. He's one of those guys that can create explosive plays for an offense. He won't be a volume player, but he can create explosive plays for an offense.
So, Greg, this is our last pick six segment. And so I want to ask you, talking about this receiver position, is there a guy that before we get to next week, you just feel like, hey, I want to talk about this guy. I want to make sure that, I'm able to find somewhere to discuss this receiver that, maybe he doesn't go day one, maybe he doesn't go day two, maybe he's just a day three guy, but really is a guy to keep an eye on here for the next level.
Well, I'll tell you a guy. I watched him last summer, and then I just finished him up recently. Austin Watkins from Alabama Birmingham.
Awesome.
I really like this kid on tape. Now, you could say he's a little tight-hipped. I mean, he's more smooth and fluid. He's not sudden, but this kid is big. In some ways, I thought I would put him and a receiver we've already talked about in a similar category, Josh Palmer. They both play big. They play like NFL wide receivers. And Watkins has size. He's got play speed. He's got hands. He's got body control. He's competitive. He made contested catches. He's got a powerful looking body, and he played that way. Don't you agree, Fran?
He's a guy that really checks the box. One of the things I've talked about a lot, you and I talked about it last week, playing through contact. I thought he was really good in all phases playing through contact. I
couldn't agree more. He's not like, throttle down, shifty, that kind of receiver, but he's just a big physical guy. He caught the ball with his hands. He ran a ton of in-breaking routes, and he caught the ball so easily with his hands on those in-breaking routes. He just snatched it. I guess the question you have, can he win vertically at the next level? He won vertically at UAB. Obviously, that's Conference USA. It's not a Power 5 conference. That's a hard question to answer, but I almost came away from this kid, and this is going to be crazy, thinking that he has a chance to be kind of a wide receiver 1 or a 1A down the road, depending on team and scheme. I'm not saying he's Michael Thomas. Okay. I don't want to, but Michael Thomas came out as a 2nd round pick. Some people loved him. Some people thought he was a 3rd round pick. And then he goes to a team that really features him. And obviously he's got good traits, and he becomes a big time volume receiver. Watkins to me is a guy that could be very much a function of where he goes and how he's used.
And I thought he had a good week down at the Senior Bowl too, Greg. He lined up inside and outside, which we didn't really see too much of him inside at UAB. And so being able to see him line up at all 3 spots, I thought showed up. And look, he ran mid 4.5s, but I thought you talked about, I thought he had enough juice to work vertically. I wrote down Michael Gallup, and Gallup has been a boundary X and vertical receiver for Dallas. And I feel like Watkins has that same kind of skill set, but he showed some really good stuff.
I couldn't agree more. And it's funny you mentioned about mostly outside. He did line up in the slot when they went with closed formations to the boundary. He ended up moving to the slot, on the twin side.
On the twins,
Yeah. So I mean, I don't know. I loved him last summer, and I totally forgot about him until a couple of days ago, and then I said, "Oh no, I got to watch this guy again." And I kind of felt the same way. I mean, he just looks the part. Like I said, it's like Josh Palmer. They look the part.
Yep, I totally agree with you. Well, Greg, this has been fun. We've done this segment now, every week over the last couple of months. Next week is the NFL draft. You will join us, me, you, Dane Brugler. We'll be taking fan questions and going through a lot of different topics. So it'll be a lot of fun next week right here.
So next week we'll be told how we don't know anything.
That's the plan. That should be like just known though. You should know that by this point. So we'll get to all the other questions outside. Right. When me, you, and Dane chop it up right here on the Journey to the Draft podcast.
It's time for Mr. Relevant.
Well, excited to welcome in here to Mr. Relevant here on the Journey to the Draft podcast, a guy that needs no introduction. He's been a 20-year host for the NFL matchup show over on ESPN, which, by the way, if you guys have not seen the latest edition, it went up Wednesday evening, this past Wednesday, 9 o'clock on ESPN2. But then also next week, we've got another edition Tuesday on ESPN2. Greg Cosell, Sal Paolantonio, Matt Bowen breaking down some of the top prospects in this class on both sides of the football. It's always outstanding analysis. And Sal, let's welcome you into the show for the very first time. I appreciate you joining us here on the podcast.
Thanks a lot for having me, Fran. We're back. We have Matt Bowen in the studio, and of course, the founding father of the NFL matchup show, Greg Cosell, who, in my view, does as good a job as anybody in the whole country breaking down college quarterbacks, professional quarterbacks, the passing game in the NFL. So, our mandate on the show is a little bit different from all draft shows. We don't do mock drafts. Our mandate, and it was set down by Greg when we started these draft specials for the matchup, is, make sure we take a look at these players, these college players, these top college players, Fran, and how they will project into the modern current NFL. It's not designed to be an esoteric or philosophical show, but a practical show that people can look at and say, okay, this team fits into what this player fits into what my team does.
Yep. And what I love about it, obviously, with the work that you and with what Greg and Matt bring to the table, it's not just for the hardcore football nut. It can speak to everybody and really makes everybody such a smarter fan. So really, really appreciate the work that you guys have always done over on that show. And if you have not checked out the draft specials, they are awesome. They've been doing them for the last few years, and it's really just awesome TV. You don't really get this kind of analysis on television for the NFL draft. So it's great, all the work that you guys do. Now, Sal, you're one of ESPN's national correspondents. You are plugged in to all things NFL. You know how things are going all around the league. And so I wanted to kind of bring you on and talk through some of the pivot points of this draft, where things can kind of turn on their head, because we have an idea of who's going to go number one, number two. We have an idea that there's going to be a quarterback at number 3. I'm interested to get your thoughts. I guess we'll start at number 4 with Atlanta. When you look at the Falcons, obviously a new regime there, new head coach, new general manager, how do you kind of see that going, and what has been the scuttlebutt around that selection, and what could happen there at number 4?
Well, I think that there are several natural pivot points in the top 10, and number 4 with the Atlanta Falcons is definitely one of them. So when you have this new head coach, Arthur Smith, who is basically a pound and pound kind of guy, he's going to put a fullback on the field. He's going to put an extra blocker on the field like he did in Tennessee. He's going to try to run the ball as much as possible. But, he also really turned Ryan Tannehill into a terrific play-action passer as a result of that. The Tennessee's offense, in my view, was very underrated in the last couple of years.
Sure.
Yeah, they went on the road. They won big playoff games on the road. They had some really bad injuries on their offensive line last year that held them back a little bit. So I am going to say that at 4, with a natural pivot point there, they're going to make a decision based on who's available, whether they're going to stick and help Matt Ryan or they're going to try to trade out. And I actually think what happens at number 3 may influence what happens at number 4.
Interesting.
Because I think 3 is the first pivot point. Truly, I don't think we know what San Francisco is going to do at 3. They're going to pick one of 3 quarterbacks, Mac Jones, Justin Fields, or Trey Lance. And whatever quarterback they pick, take off the board, I think will eliminate trade options for Atlanta at 4. So 3 and 4 are 2 natural pivot points, no question. In recent years, we've seen a lot of trades pre-draft and rumors of trades on draft day, but it's harder now because of the truncated time that you have to pick a player in the first round. It's harder to pull that trigger. You basically have to have it in place beforehand. Usually now you're stuck picking where you are on draft day. I think at 5, I'd be blown away. I know people want to say, hey, we got to protect Joe Burrow, but if Joe Burrow is not banging the table for Chase at that point, his fellow player from LSU, or Kyle Pitts, two guys who are going to be plug and play, and Sewell, the Bengals have really 3 great options there, unless somebody jumps up ahead of them at 4 looking for Pitts. I think the Kyle Pitts, the Florida tight end / wide receiver, is a player that's worth going up and getting. And that could be the Dallas Cowboys.
Interesting.
Dallas has enough ammunition to go from 10 to 4 to take Kyle Pitts. If I'm Atlanta, I do that trade. But if they don't have enough ammunition, if I'm Atlanta, I'm staying at 4 and drafting Kyle Pitts for Matt Ryan.
Yeah, I think that's obviously one of the big storylines, certainly for the top 5 of this draft, is what Atlanta tries to do. I love that thought of Dallas potentially making that move up. I know that Jerry Jones, Stephen Jones have gone on the record saying how much of a unicorn he can be. So they're clearly, and they have not been bashful in the past about sharing their love for people that they are very interested in the NFL draft. You talked about the Cincinnati Bengals,
to go from 10 to 4 though, it's going to take a first-round pick down the road, I think. I mean, You look at what it took to go from 12 to 6. The Eagles got a first-round pick to go 6 spots down to 12.
It's true. Yeah, it's gonna require certainly that. And to me, if you're Atlanta, even though you would love to have Pitts to be able to pair with Matt Ryan, that becomes a no-brainer at that point for a team that's clearly trying to turn over to a new page in their history. To me, like the other team there, in that top 10, that is kind of a mystery at this point, just because you have the new regime, is Detroit. You've got Brad Holmes coming over from the Rams. You've got Dan Campbell as the new head coach. They talked about the toughness mindset and the way that they want to kind of approach things. The Rams have been very unique in terms of the way that they've approached the draft over the last couple of years. How do you view them at this point and the direction as they could potentially go? What are people saying about the Detroit Lions at this point?
No one's really talking about the Lions because they've been so irrelevant for so long.
Right.
Let's just say that Pitts is gone and Chase is gone and Sewell is gone. Now that means you still have one of the 2 quarterbacks or 2 of the 3 quarterbacks still available. That means you got probably, let's say San Francisco at 3 takes Mac Jones. Now you still have Trey Lance and Justin Fields on the board at 7. So if I'm Detroit and I have Jared Goff, I'm dangling that out there and saying, you know what, if you want one of these 2 guys and you want to jump ahead of Carolina at 8, come get one of them. Because Carolina then at 8 is going to take it. And I think that team, Fran, is Washington.
Interesting. Yeah, that's making that move from 19. But again, you're talking about that's a team in need of a quarterback.
And so, Fran, 19 to 7 is a long way.
Yep.
You're going to have, if you're Washington, you're definitely giving up a first rounder for sure in the future and more to go there and get Lance if you want Lance. And I think Lance is a guy that they do want. So I think 7 is a natural pivot point. Let's say Carolina really wants Lance at 8 and they get on the phone to Detroit. And I agree with you. The 2 major pivot points are 4 Atlanta, 7 Detroit. You are correct, depending on what happens at 3. So if you're Detroit, then you get on the phone with Washington and say, we know Carolina's taking Trey Lance. Come up and get him. Because in my view, Lance is the prototypical stand-in-the-pocket quarterback who can also make second reaction plays. But he's going to need some tutoring. He's going to need a year. And you have that with Ryan Fitzpatrick sitting there. And Ryan Fitzpatrick's going to start 6 to 8 games. But, here's the other thing that people need to realize. In the NFL now, in 2021, with a 17-game schedule, you're going to need 2 quarterbacks. You're going to need 2 quarterbacks. You're going to need 2 quarterbacks. You really are. That's why I love the idea that the Eagles picked up Joe Flacco. I really do. Because a 17-game schedule's never been tried before. And somewhere along the line, a good head coach is going to try to spell guys 65, 70, 80 snaps offensively. So, we're going to be playing load management in the National Football League. So in the fourth quarter, you're up by 20. You're starting quarterbacks off the field. Off. You're trying to find them, you're trying to find them 15, 20 snaps of rest.
I think that's absolutely one of the undersold storylines for sure with the announcement that the league is expanding the schedule. So you talked about 2 potential moves here for the NFC East, with Dallas potentially moving up, Washington potentially moving up. When you look at the Cowboys now sitting at number 10, and you look at the New York Giants at this point, this is a team that obviously they've got a couple holes. They were pretty active in free agency. What's the talk in terms of the different directions that they could potentially take? Obviously, Joe Judge, a staff full of coaches with college connections. What route do you feel the Giants are going to go at this point in their development?
The Giants need a pass rusher for sure. They need to put pressure on the opposing quarterbacks. They did not do a very good job of that all of last year. That's a major issue for them. So I would be surprised if they didn't take the best pass rusher at number 11.
Sal Paolantonio, always outstanding information. Again, one of ESPN's national correspondents. You can check out the NFL Matchup Show next Tuesday, 10 p.m. Eastern Time on ESPN2. 20 years now as the host for the NFL Matchup Show. Sal, thank you so much for joining us here on the Journey to the Draft podcast. We will talk to you soon and hope to see you even sooner than that.
Okay, thanks a lot, Fran.
Looking for a unique experience for the young Eagles fan in your life? Eagles virtual youth football and cheerleading clinics are now being offered on April 25th and May 16th. Register today at philadelphiaeagles.com/clinics.
Now it's time for Draft Buzz.
All right, well, let's now transition to Draft Buzz as we do our final mock draft roundup of the 2021 NFL Draft. As I welcome in my friend Ben Fennell. Ben, it's our last one. What do you think?
Yeah, it feels like the finish line to the marathon, as we've been doing these seemingly for months and months and months. It's kind of sad to see it go, and we're gonna actually get some real results to analyze, which is fun too. But it's a week left, 8 days to the first round. Exciting time.
You're not completely out of the woods yet because, as I mentioned earlier on the show, you will be joining me for our mock draft extravaganza where we've got 32 writers from 32 teams joining us to share their thoughts on how their teams that they cover will go through this NFL draft. We'll be dropping that on Monday morning first thing. So make sure you stay tuned right here to this channel. It'll get sent right to your phone and to your mobile device. But this is our last mock draft roundup where we take a look at a media mock draft. And the one we're going to focus on here today is going to be the one that was just dropped on ESPN earlier this week. Mel Kiper, Todd McShay, 3-round mock draft. And usually these guys will do their mock drafts based off what they hear and how, the kind of the intel they're getting from around the league. They did put this one out with the thought that this is what based off their own rankings and how they view the player. So a little bit different than what we normally see from those guys, but still plenty to analyze and take away. And I guess we'll start off with the pick from round 1 that made you go, huh? And I'll let you kick things off. What was the first one that made you go, like kind of got you thinking just about the player's value and the fit?
Well, I felt like there was 2 in the top 10 that were just off by a pick. And that was the Bengals deciding to not go with Jamar Chase, but go with Penny Sewell instead at tackle. And then a couple of picks later, the Carolina Panthers going with Rashawn Slater instead of Trey Lance sitting there on the board. Now they've obviously addressed the QB position with Sam Darnold. I don't think they're out of the woods, though. I think if Trey Lance is sitting there at 8, I think that's a great value, and that's a great, obviously developmental chip to have at the quarterback position, which we know is the most valuable, and it's a down class next year. If he's sitting there at 8 and I'm the Carolina Panthers, I'm putting him and Darnold together saying, go compete and let the cream rise to the top.
We talked about that last week, I think, with Dane, where we talked about just Carolina and their options at 8. If a quarterback were to fall to them, whether it was Lance, whether it was Justin Fields, whether it was Mac Jones, and, you would say like, oh, well, you just gave up 2 picks for Sam Darnold. And to me, like, I look at that and it's almost like if you felt that you wanted to give up 5 picks or 6 picks for Deshaun Watson, you wanted to spend that capital to make sure you got the quarterback position right. Throw another first-round pick at that and make sure that you get it right. Keep throwing darts. Do what the Seahawks did. We've seen that in the past. I feel like that would be the similar strategy.
In the very next pick, the Denver Broncos at 9 taking Trey Lance.
Yep.
I'd be sitting there on the phone with the Panthers at 8 saying, we're taking Trey Lance. We're taking Trey Lance. We're taking Trey Lance. Come move up 1 spot to get your guy, and maybe we can get, an extra first-round pick. If we really don't want the quarterback at 8, I'd be shocked if the Panthers made a pick at 8, because that's billboard central to say, whoever wants Trey Lance at number 8, come get him. We're the team you want to trade with.
Yeah, I think we'll get a sense, obviously, how Carolina, Denver, some of those other teams outside the top 5 feel about the quarterback class. If one of those guys falls, if it's not 1, 2, 3, 4 right off the bat, it'll be interesting. That would certainly want to be.
If I was Washington, Fran, I would fly up there to 8. But they made an interesting pick later on in their current spot at 19.
That was a perfect transition by you. It's like you've done a podcast before. My next one would have been Jamin Davis, the linebacker from Kentucky, going at 19 to the Washington football team. Now, it seems like one of the chic picks, Ben, in mock drafts lately. There's been a lot of buzz, a lot of smoke about Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah going to Washington at 19. And I think it makes a lot of sense. You and I have talked about that connection here on this draft or on this podcast over the last few weeks. I think it makes a lot of sense. Owusu-Koramoah did go off the board in this mock draft at 18 to Miami. So he is not available to them. They stay at linebacker. They go with Jamin Davis, who, there's been a little bit of buzz that he's really kind of building momentum as we get close to the draft, and a guy that could go very high.
Well, he's on the all rocket ship team this offseason because he's just flown up boards, meteoric rise this whole college football season. And I love stories like that. I love the kind of one-year wonders because it's just great opportunities. We had all the guys that opted out. A lot of guys really took advantage of this 2020 season, their opportunity, whether it's the meteoric rise of Zach Wilson, Javonte Williams. Jamin Davis is the poster child for flying up boards and being a seemingly unknown to a first-round pick. I would not be surprised to see him go in the middle of the first round.
Yeah, that's a big name certainly to keep an eye on here as we get closer and closer to the draft. Let's go now. Pick that would surprise us in round 1. What would be one, whether it's a specific player team match or just a player going that high that would shock you in the first round?
This is going to be an interesting pick here, and that's Caleb Farley from Virginia Tech falling to number 20 to the Chicago Bears. Not that I don't think that's great value. I just think the Bears have a lot of other needs to potentially address that you may need more of a day one ready player with Farley's obviously injury concern. There's some rumors on whether he'll be ready, maybe a redshirt year. Long story short, I think the Bears just have a lot of needs to then take a player that has some question marks about availability and readiness and rawness and developmental aspect of just playing the position. I think there's a lot of questions around Farley that the Bears community and the fan base may want somebody that's a little bit more ready to go.
Yeah, there's some great nuggets that was shared by Mike Renner over on the 2-for-1 Drafts podcast that he does with Austin Gale. Mike's father is works with people's backs. I forget exactly what profession he has, but something in the medical field. And he asked his dad after the injury, after the news came out about him getting the second surgery, and he said, "Yeah, I mean, the back injury stuff tends to linger. And that's something that I think will be interesting for him." We talked was it last week about how he had got the thumbs up from NFL teams and their medical teams. I'm interested to see ultimately how that goes. And there's plenty of cases over the years of guys that fall due to medical reasons, and it turns out to be okay. DK Metcalf is a great example. He had that back injury. He had that fracture in his final season at Ole Miss. He goes on, he falls down in the draft, and he was an elite talent who fell because of medical. and he's so far been okay, knock on wood. Hopefully that continues for him. That has not always been the case. I think it'll be a really interesting case study again with Caleb Farley, knowing what we know and not knowing what we don't know. It's just so much that's tough to predict with his future.
Yeah, it seems like there's always one of these kind of prospects, whether it's our own Sidney Jones, Jalen Smith, Jeffrey Simmons 2 years ago. There's always that kind of medical guy that has the ability. The tape checks out, the height, weight, speed checks out, but just the medicals, the medicals. And I mean, you aren't going to pretend to be doctors. Good thing Renner has a back specialist in the family to give us some insight. But it's always seems like there's always a prospect that's kind of swirling around this conversation every draft cycle.
So one for me, Jalen Mayfield, the offensive lineman from Michigan, sneaking into the first round at 32 to Tampa would be interesting. Look, Tampa always trying to beef up the trenches. They took Tristan Wirfs last year. My guess is that Jalen Mayfield would slide into guard, but that was a pick that surprised me at the back end of round one. Let's go now to round two. We love talking about the round two and round three of these mock drafts. Our favorite matchmaker pick in round two. I'll let you go first here with this one.
Well, I like the pair of security blankets. You know, the Jags in the first round getting Trevor Lawrence, Kadarius Toney. We love that combo. But in the second round, then adding Travis Etienne. You know, just making that backfield mate with Trevor Lawrence much more comfortable. And then later on, Pittsburgh Steelers took Najee Harris in the first round. Circle back round two, get Alex Leatherwood. You know, just having some young rookies from the same program, some just familiarity, not only personally but on the field. I just think that's a great fit. Not to mention just great talents and great fits for those particular schemes and organizations.
Yeah, I think the another one that stood out to me was Greg Rousseau going round two, 56 overall to the Seattle Seahawks. When you look at the types of rushers Seattle has brought in over the years, and you can go, 4, 5, 6 years, look in the NFL draft, they've taken a lot of these guys that are long, tall, positionally versatile, that can kick inside at times and sub. The Rasheem Greens, the Malik McDowells, you go up and down the list. LJ Collier, they took in the first round a couple of years ago. Michael Bennett obviously had a ton of success. All those, they've taken a lot of these guys over the years. They trade for Carlos Dunlap last season at the trade deadline. I think that Rousseau certainly provides that kind of body type for them in round two.
You know, and I think my favorite pick out of all three rounds.
Okay.
Number 39 to the Carolina Panthers, Hunter Long. Second tight end off the board after Kyle Pitts. I just think that's a great spot in the draft, great value. And I think he's going to be an outstanding pro that just doesn't gather the headlines and the buzz like some of the other top players or even the other top tight ends. We don't see him mixed in with Brevin Jordans and Freiermuths and names like that. Hunter Long is an outstanding prospect. And to see him go in the top 40, that just banged my gavel right there to say I agree.
What was your most surprising pick in the second round? For me, it was towards the back end. Anthony Schwartz, the speedy receiver from Auburn, going to the Cleveland Browns. That one surprised me. I guess from a matching him to the Browns isn't surprising because I think if anyone were to take him, that would be the kind of program that would say, hey, look, this guy is an athletic tester. He's really, really young. He's a absolute speed demon. The production's not there, but we can figure that part of it out. I think even in the offense, I think that makes sense. The way that they play, a lot of run game, play action. Hey, let's get this guy over the top. Let's get some easy completions underneath. I think that makes sense. But him in round two, I just haven't seen a lot of that. So that one was a little bit shocking.
Yeah, I thought he was a clear-cut day three speed demon that was a little bit raw to just playing receiver, and those are the flyers you take on day three. I had two other guys as day three prospects that ended up going in round two. So not even that they went in round three, a complete round earlier. And that's back-to-back picks. Patrick Jones, the second, going to the Packers at 62. And then the Chiefs following up, getting Malcolm Kuntz, outside linebacker out of Buffalo, two kind of edge rushers that I had day three grades on. Patrick Jones, I didn't think had a great season. I thought Rashad Weaver kind of overtook him and then was a little uninspiring down at the Senior Bowl. I think he's a nice, experienced player, can play up and down the line, but just didn't really show out against the best competition at the Senior Bowl. And Malcolm Kuntz had the injury heading into the offseason, didn't get to see him at the Senior Bowl. Some NFL teams really value him and like him more than maybe the media and the buzz suggests. But both players going in round two, I thought was a little bit high for me.
All right, let's transition now to round three. Our favorite matchmaker pick. Same idea here in the third round. What was one that stood out to you?
I like seeing Chris Rump II go to Miami. Now, this is a guy that won't be a fit for every scheme, But if you're one that has some exotic pressure packages, particularly in sub packages like Brian Flores loves to deploy in that pressure man scheme, you could do a lot of fun stuff with a Chris Rumpf and literally line this guy up all over the place in the box with the intent of going forward and rushing the quarterback. So he won't be an early down player for everybody, won't be a traditional fit for everybody. But if you're one of these kind of exotic schemes that just want to load up with rushers, a lot like the way we saw maybe the Cardinals play last year, they get in the third down, Fran, and then put like 7 linebackers on the field to all just rush the passer. I could definitely see a scheme like that. So Chris Rumpf going to Brian Flores in Miami. I like that.
I actually like that one too, and I think that's the kind of scheme where he could have some success in kind of a specialized role. Something you and I actually talked about this week over on the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast with the talk of position switches and guys that need to move around, positionless football. We talked about players like a Chris Rumpf and what would be necessary for him moving into the NFL. I think another interesting guy, to me, I look at Peyton Turner in round 3, the defensive end from Houston. He goes 78 to the Minnesota Vikings. We know that Mike Zimmer, they like those bigger defensive ends, those guys that can push the pocket. Turner can definitely do that. He plays a million miles an hour at all times and is a really fun player to study on film. I think in round 3, that one makes a lot of sense. I think the scheme fit, the need, the schematic fit. I mean, everything really, really matches up. I like the value there of Turner in round 3.
Yeah, he's a good player. The Vikings need some help in the trenches there. Obviously, last year with some of the opt-outs and injuries didn't go as planned, but adding some good bodies like Peyton Turner that could play off the edge and base and then come kick into 3-tech and give you a little juice in the interior. He's a great value there in the 3rd round.
All right, let's go surprise round 3 pick. What was one that shocked you a little bit?
Well, it was interesting to see, guys like Sean Wade and Tay Gowan go off the board in round 3. But I was more shocked to see Levi Onwuzurike fall to 80th to the Las Vegas Raiders. Surprising to see him fall so far. I have a 1st round grade, a back end of round 1 grade on Onwuzurike. I thought somewhere in the top of round 2 would be a good, landing spot. That's kind of where Christian Barmore landed as the first interior defensive tackle off the board, I believe 44 to the Cowboys. So I thought right in that ballpark would be a little bit more appropriate. Ends up going almost an entire round later to the Raiders. So a guy that opted out of 2020, only saw him one day down at the Senior Bowl, kind of a out of sight, out of mind. But in a very down interior defensive tackle group, I got to think that some of the elite guys are going to rise and maybe get taken a smidge earlier.
Yeah, I think that's certainly a big one to watch. And like Levi Onwuzurike, like him falling to 80, you would say, all right, well, maybe he took the year off. He's a little bit smaller, got banged up down at the Senior Bowl. But the talent, for sure, better than the 80th overall pick. So whoever were able to get him that late, I think would be getting a little bit of a steal there. To me, I talked about Minnesota at 78. Getting Peyton Turner, Minnesota at 90, taking Richard LeCounte, I think would be a little surprising. LeCounte was in a lot of mock drafts as a potential 1st round pick, really for the last couple of seasons. Was banged up this year. He got into an auto accident late in the season, and then he didn't test very well. He wasn't at the Senior Bowl, so the buzz is definitely kind of slowed down a little bit on him. So him late in round 3, I think would be surprising. This is a guy that had that pedigree of being a potential 1st round pick, but just with what's happened since like October up until now would be a little bit surprising for sure. Not to say that he couldn't meet that draft slot, but that would be a little bit surprising at this stage in the game. All right.
Well, real quick before we move on to the Eagles picks really fast.
Yeah.
3 full rounds.
Okay.
Over 100 picks here. I think it was 105 picks.
Right.
So let's assess who is the biggest name missing out of 3 rounds. So I have 10 names here to consider.
Okay.
So we have, Kendrick Green out of Illinois, who a lot of people think is a day 2 player. Trey Smith. A couple running backs didn't fall in these first 3 rounds, whether it's Kenneth Gainwell, Michael Carter, Trey Sermon. No Brevin Jordan off the board. Brady Christensen seems like he's that next tackle to maybe go in round 4. No Kellen Mond. In kind of a down back end QB year. We see Davis Mills in round 2, but no Kellen Mond. And then some linebackers that I thought had day 2 value in Derek Barnes and Dylan Moses, both sitting there for day 3. My vote, I was shocked to not see Kellen Mond. But outside of that, Kendrick Green, I think, is a day 2 player all day long. And if you like an Elijah Vera Tucker and all these zone schemes in the NFL, he should be a coveted player.
Yeah, you know how I feel about Kendrick Green. That would be a guy certainly that would be a great value on day 3 of the draft. Let's go now to some Eagles selections. And so they provided blurbs for all these picks. We've got something we could chew on here. So Jalen Waddle at number 12. And here's the blurb. The Philly can exhale. The Eagles move back to 12. Still got one of the top 4 pass catchers. Waddle is the most dangerous player in the class with the ball in his hands. Let's talk about it, Ben. What do you think? Jalen Waddle at number 12.
Works for me. That's a good player, a good weapon added to the offense. Whether you want to call him the X, the Z, the F, the returner, I don't care what you call him, what number you want to give him. He's a guy I'm excited to get into the locker room. He's a guy I'm excited to see on the practice field this summer, training camp, preseason. I'm excited to see this guy in the cafeteria. And this is a guy I just want in the building, Fran.
Yeah, this certainly would provide some juice to offense and the special teams as well. Let's go Nick Bolton. Linebacker, 37 overall. That's the second round pick here from Mel Kiper and Todd McShay. Here's the blurb. This is a great fit for the Eagles, who need a new sideline to sideline, but a linebacker and new coordinator, Jonathan Gannon's defense. Bolton is a tackling machine. What do you think? Nick Bolton in round 2. I'm a big fan of Nick Bolton. So that to me, I like that selection there in round 2.
I think he's an outstanding player. I think guys like Jamin Davis and Zaven Collins in their rise in 2020 have kind of come at the expense of Nick Bolton not being a second round player. But in another class, I think Nick Bolton is a first round talent, and somebody would be more than willing to take him in the middle of round 1. I love his explosiveness, his range. I think he's more savvy in some underneath coverage than people think, but he's a tone setter. He's a leader. He's a captain. He's that infectious guy I think you want captaining your defense for the next, dozen years.
He's that's certainly that kind of play. I mean, he's been the most productive linebacker in the SEC the last 2 seasons. So despite the limitations, I think there's something to be said for a guy that just finds his way around the football. Let's now go to round 3. 2 picks here, both of them Syracuse defensive backs. We'll start at number 70, Ifeatu Melifonwu. Here's the blurb. Melifonwu needs some refining, but he has a lot of upside as a press corner. The Eagles are lacking depth at the position beside Darius Slay and Avonte Maddox, who could be a free agent in 2022. And then just real quick, 84, safety Andre Cisco. Cisco is a ball hawk on the back end, hauling in 13 interceptions over 24 career games. The Eagles were one of the 4 teams in the single digits in that category last season. So, Ben, let's talk through it. The 2 Syracuse DBs, Melifonwu and Cisco in round 3. To me, I see it as Melifonwu being a really, really impressive piece there in the 3rd round. I think that guy's got starting potential on the outside at corner. And then Cisco late in round 3, I think that's probably around the range where people are going to feel comfortable taking a swing, because not only does it, the highs are really, really high. You talk about the ball hawk traits, the ability to take the football away. He'll give up some big plays as well. He's got some things to clean up. Also coming off the knee injury in the middle of the season last year. So you get a little bit of a medical knock as well. But when Cisco has been on the field, he has been very, very productive.
Yeah, both really productive players. Melifonwu is really interesting with the height, weight, speed, explosiveness, also a strong player. He's a guy that also slid into safety very quietly at the Senior Bowl and defended some tight ends. He has that type of size at over 6'2", 212 pounds for a corner. So if maybe the lower half stiffness doesn't fit the scheme, he might be a guy that, ends up being the safety, or maybe that third safety, or even a nickel type player to erase some of these big slots that are all over the NFL. I think he's a more versatile player than people think. But he's an outstanding athlete. I mean, he really could have done anything he wanted in his life, whether lacrosse, track, basketball. Incredible, incredible athlete. And Andre Cisco, another guy that I think is kind of overlooked in this class. Everybody wants playmaking safeties. Don't let the Tyrann Mathieu, Buda Bakers type fall this far. That's Andre Cisco. He's a guy that gets the ball back for the offense. Yeah, he's got some eye violations. He takes some chances, but he's that live wire that gets the ball back. He's that kind of infectious ball magnet on the back end. That he's another guy that I was just watching D. Eskridge film. He guarded Eskridge outside the numbers down in the red zone. So he's a guy with some cornerback pedigree as well. Yep. So 2 guys from the same school that I think are absolute ball of clays as far as where you want to play them and what you want to do with them at the next level. At the end of the day, Fran, good depth, good players, versatile, and I'm excited about them.
Yeah, that would be a really interesting haul for sure. So make sure you go check out this mock draft from Mel Kiper and Todd McShay. You can find that over on ESPN.com. You can also make sure you go listen. Both guys talk about the draft over on their podcast, which is called First Draft, hosted by Field Yates. So Ben, you'll be back Monday morning. you and I, for the last time before the start of the 2021 NFL Draft, we'll be going through one big mock draft, all 32 picks. Excited to dig into that next week right here on the Journey to the Draft podcast. Well, great stuff there from Ben, from Sal, and obviously from Greg. Great to hear from all three of those guys. And again, next week is our fan Q&A, our draft mailbag episode. So if you've got a question for Greg Cosell, Dane Brugler, or myself, jump onto our Apple Podcast page or Stitcher page or hit us up over on Twitter, and we will make sure we answer your questions next week. The draft is next week. I'm so excited. We are going to bring you a ton of content here. Make sure you stay tuned for our mock draft extravaganza episode. That should be dropping first thing Monday morning. Keep it right here on the Journey to the Draft podcast. We're almost home.
Compassionate and trusted care. Clinical expertise. It's the cornerstone of NovaCare rehabilitation and why they're the leading provider of physical therapy throughout the Delaware Valley. Don't let aches and pains or any injury slow you down. Schedule an appointment today at NovaCare.com. The Philadelphia Eagles choose NovaCare, so can you. NovaCare, the power of physical therapy.